In one of the safest countries in the world, a child vanished in broad daylight. Her last words to her mother were about a pair of shoes and an English dictionary. 3 weeks later, her body was found in a box on a lonely mountainside. This is the story of Hoang Na, and the man who turned trust into tragedy. Part 1. The Disappearance. Under the glow of Singapore's polished image as one of the safest nations in the world, the streets were expected to keep their promises. Crime here was rare, especially the kind that preyed on children. Yet on an October afternoon in 2004, that unshaken sense of security began to fracture. 8-year-old Hoang Na, a lively girl who had learned independence early, left the cramped upper room above a produce stall to make a short call from a public phone. She had spoken to her mother, who was in China, about school, about a new pair of shoes, and a small electronic dictionary. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. Then the line went dead, and so, it seemed, did her trail. The woman entrusted with her care expected to see her within minutes. The stall's familiar noise still swirled in the background, voices bargaining, crates shifting, but the girl's small figure never reappeared among them. A check of the nearby phone booth revealed an empty space, the receiver resting in place, as if the call had never happened. By evening, the streets surrounding the market were threaded with searchers. It began with a handful of friends and stall owners, then swelled into a collective effort. Volunteers from every corner of the city moved through alleys, combed bus stops, and spoke to anyone who might have seen a child in a denim jacket and shorts. The urgency was sharpened by the location itself. In a place where parents routinely let children walk to school alone, a disappearance in broad daylight was more than unusual. It was alarming. Police interviewed stall owners, drivers, passers-by. Some remembered her that day, walking barefoot, jacket still on, smiling politely when asked about her missing sandals before moving quickly away. Others mentioned a man, someone they knew from the market. His presence alongside her hadn't seemed out of place. The two had been seen together before. His name was Zha Lianghao, a packer in the wholesale market. He was known for his quiet demeanor, a man whose slow movements and simple manner didn't invite suspicion. At least, not until that afternoon became the focus of every conversation, and every half-remembered detail was pulled into the case file. The search continued into the night, a tide of flashlights sweeping through industrial lots and stairwells. The girl's absence was no longer measured in minutes or hours. It had become the city's unanswered question. And now, the investigation's first real lead pointed directly to a familiar face in the crowd. Part 2. The First Suspect. Witness accounts converged on a single name. Market vendors described a tall, slow-moving man in his early 20s who worked among the crates and pallets. His name was Zha Lianghao. He had been seen with the girl that afternoon, handing her 2 mangoes and telling her to go home. The familiarity between them had raised no alarm. They had often spoken in the past, sometimes sharing snacks or brief walks through the aisles. Detectives approached him in the same market where he spent most of his days. He appeared calm, even helpful. He confirmed speaking to her that day, repeated the story of the mangoes, and claimed to have watched her leave. His tone was flat, his manner steady, offering no hint of resistance. There was nothing in his immediate behavior to suggest panic. He was released after questioning, the file still open, the girl still missing. 2 days later, he vanished. His absence was abrupt. Colleagues had last seen him at work, then he was gone, leaving no clear explanation. This change in pattern drew the investigation back to his door, but the door was no longer there to knock on. Investigators began to rebuild his profile. Born in Malaysia, he had come to Singapore at 18 to find work. His life appeared unremarkable: low-wage jobs, a brief marriage to a woman of Chinese-Indonesian descent, a young child. Yet in the weeks before the girl disappeared, he had been living in close proximity to her family, sharing space, earning their trust. That trust now stood in stark contrast to his unexplained disappearance. With no fixed address and no trace of recent activity, the search for him expanded beyond the city. His name was added to watch lists, his photograph circulated. Each hour that passed without contact hardened the suspicion that the last person seen with the child might know far more than he had admitted. 10 days later, he resurfaced, walking into custody across the border. And this time, he carried with him the location of a place the investigators had not yet searched, a place no one wanted to imagine as part of the story. Part 3. The Box on the Mountain. Mount Faber was a short drive from the market, yet far enough to turn a secret into silence. Guided by Zha Lianghao, the investigation team followed a winding access road before he gestured toward a slope thick with overgrowth. Officers moved in, parting the branches until the sharp odor of decomposition rose from a patch of dry, withered brush. Near the base of the slope sat a sealed cardboard box, the kind used to move produce through the wholesale market. Its dimensions were too small for comfort, half the height of a child, bound with layers of tape, corners dented from handling. When the lid was pried open, investigators found 9 layers of black plastic wrapped around what was inside. One by one, the layers gave way until the remains of a small girl lay before them. The hair was still dark, the teeth slightly protruding. Identification was immediate. Forensic specialists confirmed the body was that of Hoang Na, missing for 3 weeks. The state of decomposition was advanced, yet several findings emerged. The cause of death was acute asphyxiation. Bruises marked her right temple, jawline, and lips, consistent with force applied to the mouth and nose. On her torso, faint contusions hinted at additional pressure or impact. In her stomach were traces of mango, partially digested, aligning with the timeline given by witnesses. Evidence from the recovery site connected back to the suspect. A strand of the girl's hair was embedded in the box tape. Fibers from both their clothing were found on the plastic layers. Even more telling, adhesive residue and a cigarette butt from the market storage area bore his fingerprints and saliva. The chain of movement, from storage room to slope, was becoming clearer. Yet clarity in the physical evidence did not extend to motive or sequence. Lianghao's account of what happened in that room strayed from the path the forensics marked. His story was about an accident, a game gone wrong, a panic that led to concealment. The facts in the file painted a more deliberate image. And as the interviews continued, his words began to shape a version of events that no one in the room had anticipated. Part 4. Inside the Mind of the Killer. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives. On one side, the prosecution described a man who lured a child into isolation, restrained her, and silenced her with calculated force. They argued that every step, the bindings, the suffocation, the layered concealment, showed intent, not impulse. His choice of disposal site, far from casual, indicated forethought. On the other side, the defense sought to dismantle the image of a calculating killer. They portrayed Zha Lianghao as a man of diminished capacity, his IQ measured at 76, his mind clouded by schizophrenia. Their psychiatric expert listed traits: disordered thinking, emotional flatness, delusions. Even his inconsistent claims about multiple abductors were framed as symptoms, not strategy. The prosecution's own psychiatric witness rejected that frame. An IQ below the average range did not, in their view, erase responsibility. The accused had no clinical history of psychosis, no record of treatment. His behavior after the incident, avoiding surveillance, securing a cross-border passage, concealing the body with meticulous layering, was cited as proof of awareness. These actions, they argued, demanded organization and presence of mind, traits incompatible with the defense's depiction. In the witness box, his former colleagues described earlier incidents. He had tied up young girls as a form of play, complained when they were noisy, and once struck the victim in anger. The pattern, according to prosecutors, was one of control escalating to lethal violence when circumstances aligned. The child alone, in a space under his control, with no immediate interruption. For the defense, motive remained elusive. They stressed the lack of sexual assault evidence, the possibility of a fatal accident during rough play, and panic driving poor decisions afterward. They warned that condemning him to death without absolute clarity would be an irreversible miscarriage. The judge weighed 2 incompatible portraits, a deliberate predator versus a man undone by a mix of low intellect and mental illness. The legal threshold was not sympathy but certainty, and in the end, the court found that threshold crossed. The sentence was death. And yet, beyond the courtroom doors, the public mood began to drift away from the verdict, questioning whether justice had truly found its mark. Part 5. The Verdict and the Shadows. The sentence was carried out in November 2006. At 24 years old, Zha Lianghao walked into the execution chamber after all appeals and a clemency petition had been denied. Outside the prison walls, public opinion was far from unanimous. Some viewed the outcome as the rightful closure to a case that had horrified the city. Others questioned whether the verdict had been reached on unshakable evidence or on the weight of public expectation. In the weeks before the execution, more than 35,000 signatures had been gathered in support of commutation. The petition argued for life imprisonment on grounds of mental impairment and lack of direct proof of sexual assault. It was a rare show of division in a society known for its confidence in the justice system. Media coverage did not end with the sentencing. Reports began to focus on the family of the victim, their past, and their handling of public donations. Stories circulated about personal histories and choices, shifting part of the conversation away from the crime itself. In this shifting narrative, some saw a reminder of how quickly sympathy can fracture once other details come to light. Yet the core facts remained. A child was lured from safety, her life ended in a locked room, and her body left in a box on a hillside. The trial had weighed every piece of evidence, every expert's opinion, and concluded that responsibility rested on one man. The case of Hoang Na left a mark on Singapore that went beyond its legal outcome. It exposed the fragility of perceived safety, the complexity of human judgment, and the ways a single event can ripple through a community. Years later, it continues to be discussed, sometimes as a cautionary tale, sometimes as a point of debate about the boundaries of justice. For those who followed every stage of the investigation, the verdict closed the legal chapter. What remains is the memory of a search that united thousands, a courtroom battle that tested the limits of proof, and a city forced to reconcile the image it held of itself with the reality that unfolded. What are your thoughts on this case? Was justice served, or does the story raise questions that still deserve answers? Share your perspective and join the conversation.